2 millennia ago, the ancient Jewish historian Flavius Josephus wrote of a pious Jewish sectarian group, the description of which has amazed textual detectives, scholars, and lay readers ever since. Today it's assumed that he was writing about the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a library of tattered parchments discovered in the middle of the 20th century in the unforgiving barrenness of the Judean Desert. A group he called the Essenes. But was he? Might these Essenes have been a different sect entirely?
And as for their piety towards God, it is very extraordinary. For before sunrising they speak not a word about profane matters, but put up certain prayers which they have received from their forefathers, as if they made a supplication for its rising. After this, every one of them is sent away by their curators to exercise some of those arts wherein they are skilled, in which they labor with great diligence till the 5th hour. After which they assemble themselves together again into one place, and when they have clothed themselves in white veils, they then bathe their bodies in cold water.
Josephus makes no mention of the Dead Sea or of the desert of Judea, but he does talk about a communal meal, elevated into a sacramental ritual.
And after this purification is over, they everyone meet together in an apartment of their own, into which it is not permitted to any of another sect to enter, while they go after a pure manner into the dining room, as into a certain holy temple, and quietly set themselves down, upon which the baker lays them loaves in order. The cook also brings a single plate of one sort of food, and sets it before every one of them. But a priest says grace before meat, and it is unlawful for anyone to taste of the food before grace is said. The same priest, when he has dined, says grace again after meat. They praise God as he who bestows their food upon them, after which they lay aside their white garments and take to their labors again till the evening. Then they return home to supper after the same manner.
When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the middle of the 20th century, comparisons were immediately made between this description and what was now found inscribed in what appears to be an appendix to the rule book of the desert community, known as the Community Rule.
The procedure for the meeting of the men of reputation when they are called to the banquet held by the council of the Yahad. When God has fathered the Messiah among them, the priest, as head of the entire congregation of Israel, shall enter first. Then the Messiah of Israel may enter, and the heads of the thousands of Israel are to sit before him by rank. When they gather at the communal table, having set out bread and wine, so the communal table is set for eating, and the wine poured for drinking, none may reach for the first portion of the bread or the wine before the priest. For he shall bless the first portion of the bread and the wine, reaching for the bread first. Afterward, the Messiah of Israel shall reach for the bread. This procedure shall govern every meal, provided at least 10 men are gathered together.
Curious, this stress on the Messiah of Israel. And not surprising that a number of researchers didn't hesitate to make comparisons with early Christianity. But if carbon-14 dating is to be trusted, this scroll was composed long before Jesus of Nazareth was even born. But it certainly does show that messianic expectation was in the air in those days.
Bear in mind again that Josephus makes no mention of the desert or the Dead Sea, which is why a new breed of textual detectives are suggesting that Josephus wasn't writing about the Dead Sea community at all, but about the much larger and earlier sect who wrote the books of Enoch and Jubilees, a long-vanished branch of ancient Judaism that we may rightly call Enochic Judaism.
What Josephus writes next could absolutely apply to the so-called Enochians, who wrote the books of Enoch, Jubilees, and assorted other texts, such as the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. Theirs was a whole society built around the cultivation of visions, spiritual revelations, and something we detectives revel in, mysteries.
And if there are any strangers there, they sit down with them. Nor is there ever any clamor or disturbance to pollute their house. But they give everyone leave to speak in their turn, which silence thus kept in their house appears to foreigners like some tremendous mystery, the cause of which is that perpetual sobriety they exercise.
The next part of Josephus' description has to do with initiation procedures into the sect. While it's common to assume that he's writing about the Dead Sea sectarians, might he actually be describing initiation into the larger and older Essene Enochic movement?
To be sure, there are important differences between these laws of initiation and those described in the Dead Sea Scrolls. More detective work is in order. Let's start with Josephus.
But now if anyone has a mind to come over to their sect, he is not immediately admitted, but he is prescribed the same method of living which they use for a year, while he continues excluded. And they also give him a small hatchet, and a waistband, and a white garment. And when he has given evidence during that time that he can observe their continence, he approaches nearer to their way of living, and is made a partaker of the waters of purification. Yet he is not even then admitted to live with them. For after this demonstration of his fortitude, his temper is tried 2 more years. And if he appears to be worthy, they then admit him into their society.
Next, Josephus talks about the requirements for joining the communal meal, which was apparently the focal point of their entire society.
And before he is allowed to touch their common food, he is obliged to take tremendous oaths, that in the first place he will exercise piety towards God, and then that he will observe justice towards men, and that he will do no harm to anyone, either of his own accord or by the command of others.
Compare this with what we find in the Dead Sea Scroll entitled the Community Rule, which appears to outline a 2-year probationary period in contrast to what Josephus outlines as 3 years of testing.
If he does proceed in joining the party of the Yahad, he must not touch the pure food of the general membership before they have examined him as to his spiritual fitness and works. When he has passed a full year in the Yahad, the general membership shall inquire into the details of his understanding and works of the law. If it be ordained, then he shall be initiated further into the secret teaching of the Yahad. They shall also take steps to incorporate his property, putting it under the authority of the overseer. The initiate is not to touch the drink of the general membership prior to passing a 2nd year among the men of the Yahad.
Attempts have been made to reconcile the 2 accounts, but other textual detectives are fully convinced that Josephus is not describing the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls at all, but the larger community from whom the teacher of righteousness and his followers broke away, leading them into the desert.
And assuming that the teacher of righteousness broke away from the earlier Essene Enochic movement, we shouldn't be surprised that while departing on the particulars, many of the overarching practices of Enochic Judaism would remain unchanged.
He will always hate the wicked and be an assistant to the righteous. He will ever show fidelity to all men, and especially to those in authority, because no one obtains authority without God's assistance, and that if one is in authority, he will at no time abuse it. He will be perpetually a lover of truth and reprove those who tell lies. He will keep his hands far from theft and his soul from unlawful gains. He will not conceal anything from those of his own sect or reveal any of their doctrines to others, even on pain of death. He will also preserve the books belonging to their sect and the names of the angels. These are the oaths by which they secure their proselytes.
There's an interesting clue here, since it was the Enochians, much more than the Dead Sea sect, who focused on the names of angels, as we find in the books of Enoch and Jubilees. So we may deduce from all of this that the teacher of righteousness, having failed to take the helm of the larger Essene Enochic movement, of which Josephus wrote, formed an even more exclusive group on the shore of the Great Sea of Salt. But however sincerely motivated and pious it may have seemed at the time, it was ultimately a bad bet. That's because a tiny exclusivist group of this sort was doomed to extinction. They should have recognized as much, but their belief in predestination ruled the day. They were convinced that their withdrawal from society was all part of a divine cosmic plan. But as Scottish poet Robert Burns once observed,
"The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry."
We can think of the Essene Enochians, of whom Josephus appears to have been writing, as the parent group of the teachers' subsect who took up residence in the Judean Desert. In their mind, they were the elect within the elect, the chosen among the chosen, all others, including the parent group, now being considered sons of darkness and lumped in with all the wicked of the earth, both Jews and non-Jews. One of their mysterious documents, discovered in the middle of the 20th century among the chalky marl cliffs at a place called Qumran, is a line-by-line commentary on the biblical prophet Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. It cites verse after verse from the biblical book, explaining the meaning of each. Only this is not the plain meaning, but rather the cryptic, specialized meaning, according to the teacher's sectarian community. These are hidden meanings, apparently known only to the sect and no one else.
We read in the book of Habakkuk, "For the wicked man hems in the righteous man." The wicked man refers to the wicked priest, and the righteous man is the teacher of righteousness.
This is quite curious, for while the ancient prophet was clearly speaking of the righteous and the wicked in general terms, the Dead Sea sectarians believed that Habakkuk foresaw the rise of the teacher of righteousness centuries after his own lifetime. And although the ancient prophet lived at a time when the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also known as the Chaldeans, were about to swoop down on what was left of the land of Israel, the Dead Sea sectarians, who had by now separated from the parent group, apparently believed that one of the illegitimate temple priests in Jerusalem was in fact who Habakkuk was referring to.
This refers to the wicked priest who pursued the teacher of righteousness to destroy him in the heat of his anger at his place of exile. At the time set aside for the repose of the Day of Atonement, he appeared to them to destroy them and to bring them to ruin on the fast day, the Sabbath intended for their repose.
Unfortunately for textual detectives, just as the scrolls never spell out the actual name of the teacher of righteousness, neither do they specify the identity of the wicked priest. Some have suggested that he might have been none other than Jonathan Maccabee, leader of the great revolt against the Seleucid dynasty of Syria. Perhaps it was he who persecuted the teacher of righteousness. Perhaps he even killed the teacher on the Day of Atonement.
It's also possible that the wicked priest was using the lunar calendar, which ultimately became the standard calendar in Judaism, whereas the Essene sect was following a solar calendar, which means that the teacher's Day of Atonement would not have been the Day of Atonement for the wicked priest, who chose that moment for his murderous attack.
Yet another theory is that the wicked priest was a title applied to a number of priests of the Hasmonean line, those of the family of the Maccabees. So it's a mistake to point to any one figure as the great antagonist of the teacher and his breakaway sect. There are yet other clues to consider.
How can you look on silently, you traitors, when the wicked destroys one more righteous than he? This refers to the family of Absalom and the members of their party, who kept quiet when the teacher of righteousness was rebuked, and they did not help him against the man of the lie.
It's theorized that the House of Absalom was a new term coined by the teacher's breakaway Essene movement for the parent group of Enochians, traitors in their eyes for being too accommodating to the status quo in Jerusalem. These traitors collaborated with the so-called man of the lie, who may have been synonymous with the wicked priest, or perhaps someone else entirely.
This passage refers to the traitors with the man of the lie, because they have not obeyed the words of the teacher of righteousness from the mouth of God. It also refers to the traitors to the new covenant, because they did not believe in God's covenant and desecrated his holy name.
In the end, the Hasmonean priests were destined to meet their own fate, as the land was soon to be conquered by a new empire to the west.
The later priests of Jerusalem, who will gather ill-gotten riches from the plunder of the peoples, but in the last days their riches and plunder alike will be handed over to the army of the Kittim.
The Dead Sea commentary refers to these new invaders cryptically as the Kittim, but there's no doubt who is referenced by this term: Rome.
As always, remember that old maxim of mine, that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Are you ready, Watson, for yet more sleuthing into these ancient texts? If you appreciate this video, don't forget to smash that like button and be sure to subscribe. There's so much more to come.